I never thought I'd see that day again, sitting across from the people who once made me feel invisible, the ones who told me, with a smirk, "You can eat in the garage." Even now, as I sip my morning coffee and watch the city skyline from my apartment, the memory hits like a cold breeze. My phone buzzes, an unexpected text from my cousin, inviting me to the family barbecue this weekend. For a fraction of a second, my chest tightens. The invitation feels like a trap. I smooth my silk blouse, feeling its cool weight against my skin, and glance at the reflection in the window. The woman staring back is confident, successful, and unshakable, or so it seems. But inside, a storm brews, hurt that never fully healed, pride that refuses to bow, and a spark of irony I can't suppress. How little they knew, back then, how much I would rise. The sun filters through the blinds, catching the gold edges of my watch, a quiet reminder that I built this life on my own terms. I cradle my phone, thumb hovering over the reply button. Should I go? Should I confront them? Or just let the past stay buried? And yet, somewhere deep inside, I know that when I do speak, everything will change. The memory hits me like it happened yesterday. I was 19, fresh out of college, trying to find my place in a family that seemed to delight in putting me down. The backyard was alive with laughter, sizzling grills, and the smell of rosemary chicken. I stepped up to the table, carrying my carefully packed salad, my attempt to eat something healthy amid the chaos. And then it happened. Uncle Mike, leaning back in his folding chair with a grin that still makes my skin crawl, looked me up and down. "Oh, you can eat in the garage," he said, voice dripping with amusement. The words weren't just dismissive. They were deliberate. A lump rose in my throat, my hands shook slightly, and my lips pressed together to keep the tears from spilling. My cheeks burned, not from the summer sun, but from humiliation. I remember gripping the edge of the folding table for balance, forcing myself to swallow the quiver in my voice. I wanted to vanish, to escape this cruel comedy my family had made of me. I walked past the side door, down the narrow steps to the garage, feeling each stepway like a mile. The echo of their laughter followed me like a ghost, mocking, relentless. Then I noticed it, the small, embroidered handkerchief my grandmother had given me the week before. "For strength," she said, her voice soft but unwavering. "When they try to put you down, remember who you are. Remember you have a voice that matters." I held it in my hand, feeling the delicate stitching, and for the first time that day, I made a decision. I would not shrink. I would not let this be the story they wrote for me. I stayed in the garage long enough to calm my shaking hands, to let my thoughts settle. That cramped space, once a symbol of exclusion, became my thinking room. I imagined a future where I walked into rooms with heads held high, where I wasn't defined by their laughter or their dismissals. And in that quiet, dusty garage, I vowed I would leave this small, cruel world behind and build my own, a world where I was respected, where I was seen, where my success would speak before anyone had a chance to belittle me. That day, the garage became more than a room. It became the birthplace of my determination, the first step toward independence, and the silent witness to a girl who refused to be small. After that summer, I left town quietly, carrying only a suitcase, my grandmother's handkerchief, and the stubborn conviction that I would never return the same person. I found an apartment in a city that didn't know my name, a place where no one's opinion mattered unless I allowed it. The first few months were brutal. Long days juggling multiple jobs, nights spent reading industry manuals by the dim light of a desk lamp, and constant self-doubt that whispered I wasn't ready, not enough, not worthy. But every time I felt that familiar pang of fear, I reached for the handkerchief folded neatly in my wallet, pressing it between my fingers and remembering her words. "Remember you have a voice that matters." It was in one of those late nights at a tiny cafe, laptop balanced precariously on a wobbly table, that I met Mrs. Delaney, a seasoned entrepreneur with an eye for talent and a heart that recognized resilience. She noticed me fumbling through my pitch notes, asked questions I hadn't expected, and then said, almost casually, "You have something worth building. Don't waste it hiding in the shadows." That conversation became the spark. She became my mentor, guiding me through the world I had only dreamed of entering, teaching me the unspoken rules of success while never dimming the fire I carried. The journey wasn't glamorous. I made mistakes that cost me clients, learned lessons the hard way, and faced discrimination I wasn't prepared for. I remember nights when I cried into my pillow, exhausted and afraid that I wouldn't make it. But I also remember the small victories. The first client who trusted me with a major account, the first paycheck that covered more than rent, the first glowing review from someone who didn't owe me anything. Those moments, small as they seemed, were my scaffolding, the foundation of something far bigger than I had dared imagine in that garage. And I kept it all secret. From my family, from anyone who had laughed or dismissed me, I shared nothing. Social media offered the illusion of modesty. A carefully curated post here, a vague professional update there. They didn't need to know I had climbed the ladder they once refused to let me touch. My world became one of quiet triumphs, late-night strategy calls, and personal milestones measured not in their approval, but in my own growing confidence. By the time I was 25, I owned my own consulting firm. By 27, I had secured multiple high-profile clients and partnerships that would have been unimaginable just a few years earlier. The woman who had once been told to eat in a garage now commanded boardrooms, negotiated contracts, and walked through life on her own terms. And every single step was driven by that memory, that tiny room of rejection, and the handkerchief that reminded me I had a voice that mattered. It wasn't about revenge. It was about becoming the woman who didn't need permission to exist, let alone thrive. And as I sat in my sleek office one evening, the skyline reflecting off the glass walls, I realized they had no idea what was coming. The moment I chose to speak would be the moment everything changed. The invitation to the family barbecue arrived unexpectedly, like a test I didn't ask for but couldn't ignore. I debated ignoring it, crafting excuses about work and prior commitments, but a small, stubborn part of me wanted to see them again. Not to prove anything, but to finally speak my truth. The sun was beginning to dip when I drove up the familiar tree-lined street, the scent of summer blooms and charcoal grilling mingling in the air. My heart beat in a steady rhythm, not panic, not fear, but anticipation. I stepped out of the car, heels clicking softly against the driveway, and took a deep breath. Everything was as it had been years ago. The long picnic table, the striped canopy, the laughter of cousins and neighbors. But something was different. This time, I walked with a presence that demanded notice. I wore a tailored navy blazer, silk blouse, and trousers that exuded quiet authority, carrying only a small leather bag that held nothing but my confidence and a notebook of achievements. As I approached, familiar voices turned. The laughter faltered. Uncle Mike's smirk vanished, replaced with a flicker of recognition and unease. "Is that?" His voice trailed off. Aunt Clara blinked, and I could see the gears turning in their heads, trying to reconcile the girl they had dismissed with the woman standing in front of them. I waited a heartbeat, letting the moment stretch, letting them take in my posture, the subtle glint of my watch, the faint scent of my perfume, evidence that I was no longer the timid girl they had underestimated. My eyes scanned the familiar backyard, noting the faded lawn chairs and the slightly rusted grill, relics of the past juxtaposed against the woman who had built an empire while they were busy mocking her. Then I spoke, voice calm, even, but carrying the weight of years of silent triumph. "Hello, everyone. I see things haven't changed much here." A nervous chuckle rippled through the gathering. I let it pass. I came because I realized something. I don't need anyone's approval to succeed. And I also realized some things need to be said. I reached into my bag and placed a sleek folder on the table, sliding it toward them. "This," I said, opening it to reveal press clippings, financial reports, and photos of my office and team, "is the company I founded. I am the CEO. These contracts represent millions of dollars in revenue this year alone. And yes, I am still me, the same person you once thought belonged in the garage." The silence that followed was deafening. Eyes widened. Some faces paled. Others fell into disbelief. Cousins exchanged glances, their laughter from years ago replaced by a quiet, uncomfortable awe. Uncle Mike coughed, muttering, I had no idea. Aunt Clara's lips trembled as she whispered, You built all this? I didn't rush to explain. I let the weight of my presence, the evidence of my success, and the years of self-made achievement sink in. Every detail, the polished reports, the sleek leather portfolio, the confident posture I carried, spoke louder than words. I could see the shift in them, the realization that the girl they dismissed was no longer invisible, and the power dynamic that had once humiliated me had completely reversed. And then I smiled. Not smugly, not cruelly, but with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had endured, learned, and grown. I've spent years building a life that I'm proud of, I said softly, letting each word land. And now you see me for who I truly am. Everything has changed, not because of anger, not because of revenge, but because I refuse to stay in the shadows. In that moment, the past and present collided. Their disbelief met my confidence, their shame met my grace, and I felt a calm power I had never known in that garage. The woman they underestimated had arrived, and there was no turning back. The shift in the air was palpable. For the first time, I held the upper hand, not because I wanted to punish them, but because I finally had the clarity and authority to set boundaries. I took a slow breath, letting the realization settle. I could choose how they were part of my life now on my terms. I want to be clear, I said, keeping my voice calm but unwavering. I've spent years building my life, my career, and my independence. And I'm willing to share it with you, but only if certain things change. Things that matter to me and to all of us if we're going to move forward as a family. Uncle Mike shifted uneasily. Aunt Clara's hand hovered near her mouth. I ignored the discomfort. I wasn't here to coddle them. First, I continued, respect. No more jokes at someone's expense, no more belittling comments, no more treating anyone like they don't belong. That includes the past, it's over, but the lesson is permanent. I looked around the table, meeting each pair of eyes. Second, I said, softer this time, you must pursue your passions. I've seen far too many of you settle into comfort zones because of fear or routine. Chase what matters to you, even if it scares you. Support each other instead of tearing each other down. There was a pause as they absorbed my words. I let it linger. Then I added, third, accountability. If you make a mistake or hurt someone, own it. Don't hide behind excuses or laughter. Growth comes from honesty, not avoidance. I watched the subtle nods, the tight jaws, the shifting weight of realization. They were listening now, not just hearing me, but beginning to understand that this was not a moment for shame alone, but for change. And finally, I said, placing a hand lightly on the table, I care about each of you. I want our family to thrive, but that only happens if we respect one another. These aren't arbitrary rules. They're the boundaries I set to protect myself and to invite you into a healthier, more honest dynamic. If you're willing, we can move forward together. If not, I let the implication hang in the air. Then I will continue my life without returning to old patterns that hurt me. The expressions around me shifted. Uncle Mike's usual bravado softened into something resembling humility. Cousins whispered quietly, clearly grappling with the weight of my words. And Aunt Clara, tears glistening at the corners of her eyes, finally nodded. We want to do better, she said, her voice tentative but sincere. I smiled, letting warmth creep into my tone. Good. Then let's start today. Change won't happen overnight, but we can commit to trying. And I'll help where I can. But this is a partnership, not a hierarchy. I'm not here to dominate. I'm here to redefine what family means for us. I glanced at the handkerchief folded neatly in my purse, a small but constant reminder of the girl who once ate in the garage. That same girl had grown into a woman who could set terms, enforce boundaries, and lead with both strength and compassion. Today, the power wasn't about money, or success, or revenge. It was about choice, respect, and mutual growth. For the first time, the weight of the past didn't feel heavy. It felt like a foundation. And now, The family that once tried to keep me small could rise alongside me, or watch from the sidelines. The decision, finally, was theirs. The weeks that followed were nothing short of remarkable. Conversations that had once been tinged with sarcasm or dismissal became genuine exchanges of support and curiosity. Uncle Mike started taking an interest in his own small business, seeking advice rather than making jokes. Aunt Clara signed up for night classes she'd always dreamed of, and my cousins, some still unsure, some tentative, began pursuing passions they had long ignored. Watching them change, slowly but sincerely, was both humbling and empowering. I realized that my journey hadn't been about proving them wrong, it had been about proving to myself that I could define my own life. The garage, once a symbol of rejection, now existed only in memory, a catalyst for the woman I had become rather than a shackle on my spirit. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted my apartment in shades of amber, I held the small handkerchief from my grandmother. It had traveled with me through every triumph and setback, a silent witness to my resilience. I pressed it to my chest, remembering her words, "Remember, you have a voice that matters." And indeed, it had mattered, not just to me but to those willing to listen and grow. I stood by the window, looking out over the city skyline, and felt a quiet satisfaction. Life had finally come full circle. The power I had gained was not in wealth or recognition alone, but in the ability to create change, both in myself and in others. I had learned that true strength is measured by how gracefully we lift ourselves and those around us, and how firmly we protect our own boundaries. And in that reflection, I understood something profound. The girl in the garage and the woman in the boardroom were the same, resilient, determined, and unyielding, but one had learned to speak, to act, and to thrive without permission. The family who once dismissed me had been given a chance to evolve, to honor me, and to honor themselves. And they had chosen, slowly but surely, to rise. I smiled, placing the handkerchief gently back in my purse. Life had a way of surprising us, of turning moments of shame into platforms for strength. And as I prepared for the next chapter, I knew this truth. I would never shrink again. I would never allow anyone else to define my worth. I had spoken, and everything had changed. One line lingered in my mind, my final, quiet declaration. I am seen, I am heard, and I will never be invisible again.